This is the Comics Alternative, episode 246, reviews of Greek Diary, Paper Pencil Life, and KatZine. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this week's episode, Andy and I are going to look at a variety of self-published comics. We're going to begin with Glynnis Fawkes' Greek Diary. After that, we're going to look at issues 1 through 4 of Summer Pierre's Paper Pencil Life. And then we're going to wrap up with Katriana Chapman's KatZine, issues 1 through 7. But before we get into that discussion, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by those wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price. Sometimes it could be 50% off cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that go higher than that.
And this month, as in every month, you can check out their bundles where they offer multiple comics from the same publisher for a deeper discount than you might get if you bought those comics individually. And this month, as usual, they have multiple bundles from Marvel and DC, as well as a bundle from Valiant. So check those out.
That's right. You can't beat the prices at Discount Comic Book Service, so don't even try. Just go there to their website and order your comics right now. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your books there, please send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, this is a kind of a different episode. We've never done this before. We are going to be looking at self-published comics and only self-published titles. So we've got some exciting stuff in store. But before we get to a discussion of those titles, we should mention that we've gotten not one, but 2 SpeakPipe messages over the past week.
Mail time. Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
Oh, wow. So SpeakPipe's been busy.
Yes, it has. And the first one comes from a listener that we've been hearing a lot from lately, and this is Jay Loving. So let's hear what he has to say.
Hello, Andy, Derek. This is Jay Loving, the infamous Holy Balls tweeter. I just wanted to say again how much I enjoy your podcast. I think you guys do impeccable work, and I look forward to every new episode that you guys put out. And Derek, I live in the Dallas area, and I hope someday soon to make it out to Valhalla Games and Comics for your monthly On Location podcast. Have a good day, gentlemen.
So thanks, Jay, for the kind words. It's always good to get some loving from loving.
Yep.
And the second message that we received this past week is, I don't know what the guy's name is, but his handle that he recorded by, I guess his email address, is Stay Skeptic. And let's listen to what he has to say.
Hey, I was just listening to the first podcast, and it sounded really promising, especially because I want to get into comics, but I never really read them, but I didn't really like all the superhero stuff. And I wanted to listen to the next episode, but the links are missing for some reason. Like, the new episodes work, but like episode 2 and 3, for example, I didn't check more, but there's no link there as far as I know. So I don't know. I was hoping maybe you guys could fix that, or maybe I'm mistaken or something. So yeah, just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I didn't sort of didn't know about not being able to hear the show, except that explains something that I was trying to do when I was wanting to listen to an earlier show on our website, and couldn't find it unless I went to our iTunes feed.
That's right. Now, normally if we get any kind of correspondence, such as an email or a tweet about a technical difficulty regarding our website, I usually don't share those on the podcast, but I will get back in touch with the person who tried to reach us about the problem after I figured it out. But I wanted to share this person's, and I'll call him Stay Skeptic. I wanted to share his message on SpeakPipe for this reason. A few months ago, I changed our plugin on the website. We have a WordPress site. The plugin that we had been using where people could hear the podcast from the web pages themselves is PowerPress, and that's put out by Blueberry. Several months ago, I decided to switch out plugins for that purpose. And so I took off PowerPress and I put on Libsyn's plugin. And the reason I did that was twofold. One, we are hosted by Libsyn, so I wanted to have a kind of streamlined technical interconnectivity there. But I also really do like what Libsyn does with their plugin and the flexibility in allowing you to have a player embedded within a web page. The problem with that in changing out plugins is that I have to now go back to each one of our episodes, the show notes on our website, and put in the coding. And it's not that difficult. It's just copy, paste, adjust on all of our past episodes. And what I started to do a few months ago is to work backward from the most recent episode to going back then, and I think I'm back into maybe spring of 2016. I mean, we do a lot of shows. So every now and again, I will update a few of the pages and then come back to it later. It's time-consuming, so I'm not going to devote hours in one sitting to do this. And I wanted to mention this because kind of like you, Andy, and the guy who left the message, Stay Skeptic, if you're not able to listen from our website to some of our episodes that are earlier, let's say before last year, we apologize. I will update things as we go along. Probably the best way to listen to us, regardless of this issue, is by subscribing to the podcast. I think that's the best way of listening to the Comics Alternative. You can also find us on iTunes, on Stitcher, on iHeartRadio, so you can listen through those ways as well. But I did want to thank Stay Skeptic for alerting us to this problem. I already knew about it, but it allowed me the opportunity to share this with our listeners.
Yeah, that's good to know in case any of our listeners had wanted to do the same thing that Stay Skeptic wanted to do.
That's right.
And then as one of the things I wanted to mention before we start getting into our review show is a little bit of a follow-up to our recent HeroesCon adventure. We had a handful of people stop by the booth to let us know what they thought of the podcast and that they'd been listeners. Some of them even made it on to our floor show episodes.
That's right.
And we also had some creators who stopped by. Those some of them also made it on to your interviews and the interviews we did together. But we also were visited by, at one point, a guy named Greg Steele who had a booth just kind of down the aisle from us, and he was familiar with the podcast and came by and dropped off some of his self-published mini comics, ones that he did and ones that were done also by his table mate, Matt Harrison. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to these guys because I really enjoyed their stuff. Greg gave us 2 comics. One is called You Motherfucker. And I had actually seen this on display when I was walking around, and he had to have part of the title of that kind of covered up with a sticker or something for his display copies. and that is a really fun and violent short story. And then Greg also gave us Stoner Knight, which is the medieval tale of an immortal knight who remains immortal because of a rare and widely coveted herb that he has to smoke, which is also another fun and violent story. And so I enjoyed both of those. And then he also gave us a couple books by Matt Harrison. One of them is a tiny mini comic, which is called Dicks Through History. And it's basically celebrities and historical figures, male celebrities and historical figures naked.
Wow.
That include anybody from like Henry VIII to Danny DeVito to President Woodrow Wilson, Charles Schultz, and Napoleon. So anyway, and then finally, we also got from Matt this remake basically of X-Men Comics #1. Now you had heard about this, right?
I think I had seen it or heard about it. It looked somewhat familiar. Maybe back in SPX last year.
Yeah. So basically, what Matt had done is he redrew X-Men #1 and but added his own word balloons to it, and it is hilarious. And actually, if you want to check this out, you can actually go to Matt's website, rootbeercomics.com, and read this. He refers to it on the cover as a straight-to-ink cover song. And there are actually several other cover songs on rootbeercomics.com that include first appearance of Spider-Man, first appearance of Batman and Batgirl, the Silver Age Green Lantern, and several other examples of this. And it's a lot of fun. They're hilarious. So I highly recommend checking those out. And then you can find Greg Steele's stuff. His company is called Harrington Comics, and there's harringtoncomics.storeenvy.com has You Motherfucker and Stoner Knight available, along with some other stuff. So check that out as well. Anyway, or if you happen to see either of them or both of them at a show, pick these things up. They are actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed them, and they're the kind of, I don't know, there's a kind of punk sensibility to both of their works that I really appreciated.
Yeah, I wanna get a look at those when they came to the table. They left a copy, and I think you took the copies. And so next time I see them, those guys, I want to pick up ones for me as well.
Yeah, that's often sort of what we end up having to do is divide the spoils at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
Somebody gets some of this. If we got one copy of something, we have to split stuff up.
Right. And it's appropriate, though, that you bring this up. I mean, this is the first show that we've recorded after HeroesCon, the first regular review show. So it's great that you bring this up for that reason. But also, this being a episode where we look at just self-published comics. And so that fits right in. And before we get into the specific titles that we're going to be focusing on for this week, since we're talking again about self-published works, we should mention that our friend and co-host, Gene Cannonberg Jr., has about a month and a half ago come out with a new issue of Comics Machine, or from the pen that brings you Comics Machine. Gene has a new graphic novella, as he calls it, out called Codex. I guess that's how you pronounce it, Codex. And it really is worth checking out. Andy and I each have a copy of this. And if you want to help support Gene and just read great comics, go to his website, comicsmachine.tumblr.com.
Yeah, and I was glad to get you handed off a copy of that for me at HeroesCon too, and I was glad to get that.
So, Andy, let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, and that is the self-published comics that we're going to be discussing from Glynnis Fawkes, Summer Pierre, and Catriona Chapman. You know, the idea for this show actually came from the first creator that we're going to be discussing, Glynnis Fawkes. Glynnis got in touch with us, I don't know, maybe about 2 months ago, two and a half months ago, perhaps. And she was aware of the podcast, and she wanted to make us aware of a new book that she had self-published called Greek Diary. And she offered to send us copies, which she kindly did. So first and foremost, thank you very much, Glynnis, for doing that. But a second thank you for giving us the idea for this episode, because once she sent us a copy each of Greek Diary, Andy and I were talking about the possibility, why don't we do a show devoted to just self-published comics? And so Glynnis, through her kindness, really got the ball rolling on this show. And from there, we just needed to decide what we wanted to discuss. I had already had some comics from Catriona Chapman, her KatZine, which we're going to be discussing later. And then we thought we would check out the comics of Summer Pierre, and she has a series called Paper Pencil Life. And by the way, Summer is also a friend of Glynnis's, and we're going to be talking about Paper Pencil Life after Greek Diary. But first, let's get to Greek Diary. Mm-hmm. One of the things that is remarkable about this book is, well, first and foremost, the title says it all. It's about her experience from early June to early July of last year, 2016, over in Greece and the Greek Isles. And her trip over there is a mixture of both work but also vacation, primarily the vacation that she takes with her family, her husband John and her two kids, Sylvan and Helen. I had seen some of Glynnis Fawkes' work in the past, but I did not know that she was a professional illustrator when it came to these kind of archaeological digs that she does in Greece. Now, were you familiar with Fawkes' work before Greek Diary?
I was, but I also didn't know that she had this other other professional career that you described there too, as an archaeological illustrator.
Yeah, and it really is interesting. In Greek Diary, it's divided into 5 chapters and a prologue, and it's in the prologue that we learn the context about Fawkes and her work as an illustrator for archaeological digs, some of her experiences on different digs in the past, both in Greece and elsewhere, and also her relationship in term. We get a little bit of this in the prologue, meeting her husband John, and basically the prologue serves as a springboard into the book proper. And I thought that this was really interesting. It is a diary comic in the strictest sense, because what she does is she provides, I guess it's on each page or maybe every 2 pages, sometimes more, the date of whatever happened that she's illustrating. So she'll experience something either at work or on vacation during a particular day, date that, and then illustrate what went on. So and this only takes place over a month's period, so she's very diligent. Not every day does she make an entry, but the vast majority of them she does.
Right. And so for about the first part of the book, she's working for this archaeological dig for a group that she's worked with over the years. Pretty regularly, and then after doing that for a week or so, her family joins her, and then the rest of the book is about the family's outings, along with an interesting kind of flashback to probably the earliest times in her relationship with the man who would become her husband, John.
Right, yeah, and I want to talk about that part that you just mentioned. That's in Chapter 4, and it begins almost in the exact middle of the book, which I find interesting. The first chapter of the 5, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of this locale correctly. Kencreai, Kenchrei. Do you know how to pronounce that?
No, I don't.
Okay, let's just assume that it's Kenchrei. And then if Glynnis, you're listening to this, please email us and let us know if we're correct or not. But the first chapter is called Kenchrei with no kids. And so that is the part of the book where she is there to work on the dig and without her family. And, this section is interesting in that we get to see more detail about the kind of work that she does. She had set this up in the prologue, but then in that first chapter, we get kind of a detailed account of what her days are like when she's on a dig like this. So you would think that being on an archaeological dig, one would be outside, maybe not literally digging, but being out where she could unearth some things. But that's not the kind of work that she does. I mean, she goes outside, but basically, according to this chapter, her kind of work is more interior in that she sits inside at a desk and she will go through pieces of pottery and other finds and then will illustrate them in a couple of different ways. And in this chapter, she gives us a little detail about what kind of things she needs to keep in mind and how she needs to illustrate the pieces that they find.
Right. And that's an interesting and really labor-intensive job. And again, that's one of the things you mentioned, like that you kind of weren't aware of that part of her career, or even the idea that such a job exists, but that that picking up each of these individual small pieces of pottery, figuring out what the proper orientation is, and then drawing it, and making sure the drawing is accurate and so on, is a really important part, as she explains, of the archaeological process, even in fact, different from photographing the pieces, which is what happens also. Right. But the process of drawing them also brings out certain information that isn't available through just photographing the pieces.
Right. Yeah. And as she tells us in the prologue, she gives us examples of looking at I think they're called sherds, the pieces of pottery that they find that she illustrates. And she has to look at it and then illustrate it from a particular angle. And what the illustrations will bring out is more information about possibly when and where these pieces of pottery, these sherds, originated. And she uses in this prologue the analogy of different kind of Coca-Cola bottles, right? Because you can look at different Coca-Cola bottles and what they tell you is they're from certain time or certain parts from, let's say, the late 19th or early 20th century, or even later 20th century, because the bottles change over time. And so, I mean, that's a good point of comparison in having us wrap our brain around how pottery, even small changes in the shape of, let's say, maybe the handles or the rims, can be quite telling as to when and where a particular piece of pottery originated. Right.
And then also during this earlier portion, she's also socializing with the other members of the group that include the archaeologist and others that she's worked with before, plus these students who go to Greece and take this experience as a class, and then on top of that, she's also does some other kind of regular activities, like goes for walks. And I bring that up because that's where one of the early themes or subplots or whatever you want to call it of the book emerges, which is her fear of dogs, and the dogs in Greece that will chase walkers and bite them and do other terrible things.
Yeah, that's something that runs, I think, throughout the book, but especially in this first chapter before her family arrives. Is she likes to take early morning walks. At the same time, there are some places, some households that have dogs where the dogs aren't fenced in like they should be or tied up like they should be. And so there's the danger of getting bitten. So there's that. But then from chapters 2 to 5, things change quite significantly with the arrival of her family.
Yeah. And so her husband, John, is a professor of ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And their 2 children, Helen and Sylvan. And yeah, in this, when you mentioned at the beginning that this is documenting what's basically a month-long trip to Greece, it honestly, in reading it, feels like a lot longer.
It does, yeah.
And it must have felt like that to them too, because this does not seem to be a fun trip at all.
Or fun, let's just say fun in a family way. Because I can definitely empathize with Glynnis Fawkes and her husband John as they're experiencing the many frustrations. Although I do have to say that Amanda and I have never traveled outside of the country with Zach and Zoe at any age. And so I'm sure that the complications and the frustrations are heightened even more when you're out of the country. But yeah, there's a lot of frustration in their travels with the entire family. So it does give this sense that the trip is longer than a month. In fact, when I was taking notes and preparing for our recording today, I wanted to make sure that I understood exactly when this trip overseas took place. And so early in the book, I noted, June 5th, 2016 is when she actually leaves the United States to go over to Greece. I assumed that this was at least 2-3 months long. And when I got toward the end of the book and was looking for the latest date that I can find, there's kind of a coda at the very end that takes place in December of that year, 2016. But and I saw that the latest date when they returned was in July. Mm-hmm. It's like, man, that's only a month. But you're right. It does seem much longer. And I think that's one of the strengths of this book is that Fawkes is able to show us through her various entries how this could seem a lot longer than it is because of everything they went through. And not just the frustrations, but also the fun stuff. I mean, at the same time, they do cover a lot of ground. They go from, various towns or cities and islands. So that makes it seem a little longer as well.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I don't have kids, so I've never experienced a trip like this, nor will I ever. But I was a kid, and I was a kid who would have loved to have gone on a month-long trip to Greece. Mm-hmm. And the way these 2 children in particular behave throughout this trip is particularly maddening for me as someone who didn't grow up with the resources to, take a trip overseas like this. Right. So, and in fact, it seems like a lot of the diary is taken up with, managing the kids and eating and detailing what food they get and, and how they also try to eat on something of a budget as well, as the trip goes along. And I appreciate all that. I find it all pretty interesting to read this from kind of this perspective. It's not a, we went to this place and saw these things, then we went to this place and saw these things. It is really about, what it's like to go with as a family of 4 with 2 young children on an overseas vacation like this. But also about how Greece has changed since Glynnis and John were younger and had been there earlier, even before their relationship officially started. That they, that tourists have kind of taken over certain places that weren't really touristy in their earlier experience. So there's a lot of things that they kind of show the insides of this trip, while at the same time Glynnis is also doing illustrations of the different locations. And so the kind of narrative is often punctuated by her what appeared to be like on the spot illustrations where she had drawn, the view of the bay or whatever from their hotel room or a restaurant that they're sitting in at a certain time and so on.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing I appreciate about Greek Diary is that as we go through all of the 5 chapters, there are these moments that she provides these illustrations, and more times than not, they're scenic. They're beautiful scenes. And it's a momentary pause before we get on with the next event in their trip. And I really did enjoy that because not only does that really help with the pacing, it gives us a momentary shift or a change in the story flow, but it also helps to set much more of a visual context because you're right. Although much of the story in Greek Diary is based on the things that they experience in their different locations that they travel. So they're very locale-centric. On the other hand, some of their stuff is the mendacity of their trip, right? So dealing with the kids or worrying about what to eat or who's going to eat what, which, again, it may not necessarily apply directly to their Greek experience, but that's the kind of things that families have to deal with, whether you have kids or not. We don't have much money. What are we going to eat? Or where are we going to eat? Or how are we going to get back to a particular place where we can eat? Or who's going to eat what? And especially with her kids and what Sylvan and Helen will and won't eat. And I have to say that from what I can gather, Sylvan and Helen's ages seem to be very similar to my 2 kids, Zach and Zoe. And when they were that age, Zach and Zoe had similar relationships to the Fawkes family that Zach and Zoe have with ours, in that Zach was a little easier to transport and to go places with and a little more amenable to things, whereas Zoe, I love her dearly, she was a kid, she was a fuss budget, and she, like Helen, at about the same age, would be a little difficult, let's just say, in various outings that we would take. Although we never had to deal with taking her to another country. So, my heart goes out to Glynnis and John for having to deal with that. But, hey, it's memories. And you can tell that even with the frustrations, it was overall a successful trip. Or at least that's what I gathered from this book.
Yeah. Well, and it is interesting I just don't think it's a spoiler at the end when everybody's kind of reflecting back on how the trip was. They all seem to have really positive, memories of it, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, so there's there's a lot here about the about the family dynamics, and then sort of you mentioned, I think, what is it, around chapter 4 or so. We get these other illustrations that that Glynnis explains come from a trip she took in 2003, in which
she first met John.
When she first met John, that these illustrations she had drawn on
ink on rice paper.
Yeah, ink on rice paper. Retrospectively, while she was in Australia attending graduate school, and so those illustrations are accompanied then by text that kind of explains basically how she and John got together.
Right, which is really interesting. I mean, that's one of the things that stood out in this book because it's so different from everything else that surrounds it. And this appears, we don't have page numbers, but it's almost in the very middle of the text. So if you open the book to the middle, you're going to find what we're referring to here, the illustrations of ink on rice paper. And what I'm assuming that she does is to take these illustrations and photographs them and then reproduces them in the middle of the book, because you can even see the various bends and folds of the ink paper or the rice paper.
Right. And I think that gives it an interesting look. But you also get to see in this a different aspect of Fawkes' style, because as a diary comic, it's something that she's producing kind of on the spot. Mm-hmm. It has the rest of the book has a much rougher, quick style than her normal drawing style might indicate.
Right. So we have the ink, but also we have what I guess or ink washes here that give a sense of shading and texture to the story. And as you mentioned, unlike the other comics in this book, all the text is outside of these illustrations in this ink on rice paper. So it's interesting in that it not only gives us more information about Glynnis meeting John and how they got together. And I think that's important information. But visually, and also in terms of just the storytelling as a whole, it gives us a momentary diversion. It's kind of a pause in the story in a way that is visually quite striking, and especially since it stands out from everything else surrounding it.
Right.
Yeah. So I appreciated that. And this is I guess the longest thing I've ever read of Glynnis Fawkes's, and I'm right now very interested in seeking out more of her work after reading Greek Diary.
Right. Yeah. And we should probably, I guess, mention too where people can get this.
Right. Now, if you go to her website, and that's www.glynnisfawkes.com, and that's one word, GLYNNISFAWKES.com, then you'll see not only a link to this, but also other works that she's done. And in fact, one work that is, if it's not out right now, it's just about to come out from Kilgore Books and Comics, is a title called Reign of Crumbs. And in fact, I hope to see this soon because I backed the Spring Kilgore on Kickstarter, and this book comes as one of those that I'm going to be getting. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Also, we should mention, because I think I forgot to say this earlier, that Greek Diary got the 2017 MoCCAfest Award of Excellence.
Right.
And I think discussing the work of Glynnis Fawkes is a good transition into the next title that we're going to be discussing, and this is Summer Pierre's Paper Pencil Life. And I say that because from reading Paper Pencil Life, we get a sense that Summer and Glynnis are good friends.
Right. And in Paper Pencil Life, we see this especially in various, with Paper Pencil Life being a diary comic in which most of the stories are basically on one page, or some that are a little longer than one page, and usually with with a 9-panel grid. And in some of the cases, Pierre gives us some of her experiences at comic shows like SPX, where she'll hang out with Glynnis Fawkes, as well as with Jennifer Hayden and others.
Mm-hmm. Right. But the vast majority of the pieces among the 4 issues so far of Paper Pencil Life are things that she does on a day-to-day basis. And some of those may relate to the work that she does, her own cartooning, her own art. But even more of these entries are the mundane things that she does in life, getting up and going running, or trying to keep up with jogging, and especially her relationship with her husband, Graham, and her son, Gus. And in fact, I would guess that things that go on with her son, Gus, take up at least a good half of all of the strips among these first 4 issues of Paper Pencil Life.
Yeah, and I found it interesting reading these books together, and reading Paper Pencil Life and Greek Diary together, and having so recently on our Koyama show read Kyler Roberts' Sunburning, I feel like that, like maybe 10 or 15 years from now, I want to put together a panel at like SPX or someplace like that of the adult children of autobiographical cartoonists, and then see how Gus and Glynnis Fawkes' children, Helen and Sylvan and Kyla Roberts' daughter, who also actually makes her own comics too, which are really neat, and some others, maybe like James Kachalka's kid or whatever, that to find out how they feel looking back on what their parents created, how their parents documented their lives.
Right. Now, I think that, you and I both got copies of Paper Pencil Life. I don't think you got a copy of issue number 1, but in the first issue, she does give a context of where she came up with a title for her own comic. Uh-huh. And it comes from Ivan Brunetti, the basic ingredients for doing comics: paper, pencil, and life. And so that's what she calls this strip. And that's basically what Paper, Pencil, Life, the strips in the title, are all about. What she does with paper and pencil as it relates to her life. So very much like Fawkes' Greek Diary, we get a day-to-day account of what the creator is doing. And one of the things that I found quite interesting is that in the first 2 issues of Paper Pencil Life, Pierre seemed to be more consistent than she later became in terms of keeping up with her diary, right? Mm-hmm. Of writing, if not every day, then every second, third, or maybe even fourth day. But then when we get into, let's say, the second issue, but definitely the third and the fourth, the latest that just came out, I think this spring, we see that the entries are a little further apart in spacing. Mm-hmm. And this makes sense because throughout the various issues of Paper Pencil Life, Pierre tells us not only about the joys of doing the kind of illustrative work that she does, but also some of the frustrations and struggles. There are times that she even comes out and says, I really didn't want to do an entry today, and so I didn't on that particular day, let's say. Or I didn't want to do it, but I ended up doing it, and I'm glad I did. So it's not as if this is a complete love fest, right, between Pierre and her art, because there also are some frustrations. And depending on the mood that she's in, or more times than not, the kind of day that she's having with her family, specifically Gus, she may not feel like doing an entry in Paper Pencil Life. And so I really do appreciate the honesty that we get from these strips.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because that's another thing that I appreciated about him too. But one of the things that I also appreciate about him, especially in the earliest ones I was able to read, is a kind of overall positive tone to her comics.
Right.
That is especially pretty refreshing after, kind of, and it also kind of seems to go against trends in autobiographical comics in general to kind of emphasize more, darker, more negative experiences, because those are the ones that can kind of lend themselves more to narratives. Whereas, and to engaging narratives, whereas I think with a diary, especially, there's the possibility of having a different tone to autobiography. And one of the outcomes of that can be the fairly positive tone that especially some of these earlier ones have. Now, things get kind of balanced out later on, especially as some of the frustrations with balancing work and parenthood come into play in the series. But for the most part, I was really happy with the positive tone that emerges from so many of these strips.
Yeah, and in fact, I think of the 3 titles that we're looking at this week, Greek Diary, Paper Pencil Life, and then what we'll look at in a minute, KatZine, that Pierre's work seems to have the most positive, upbeat tone overall. And you're right, there are those strips where she expresses some frustration or maybe some negativity, and they may even end with that tone or maybe a little more ambiguously. But I think more times than not, these strips come across as the glass half full. And I think where much of this comes out is Pierre's ability to really appreciate the little things in her life that, and not just things that you would think of, for instance, her family or her time, as frustrating as it may be at times with her son Gus, but just little things like that may sound kind of corny in the way I'm about to describe it, but it doesn't come across this way in the comics. But the way that it feels outside when she steps outside with a cup of coffee, we definitely know that she likes coffee because there are a number of strips that express this. But just the appreciation of the sun coming down or the sounds of the birds, or that she was able to connect up with a friend on Facebook, even though she has an issue at times with Facebook, little things like that. I mean, she's someone, at least the Summer Pierre in these strips, who seems to be able to pull the positive out of things in it, even the everyday mundane aspects of living in ways that I probably wouldn't. Right? I'm more of a glass half empty kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned those lists of things, I mean, one of the things that I really came away with after reading these books is that I kind of genuinely miss living in a place that actually has winter. Because how she, I mean, there's snow days which seem to kind of plague her productivity, and it sounds like Gus has snow days pretty frequently where they live. I think it's in upstate New York. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. And in fact, I think her husband teaches at West Point.
Yeah, and but at the same time, there's these moments where she really, I think, captures what I really miss about not having winter in South Carolina, especially having grown up in the northern Midwest. So that was something I really appreciated. One of the things I came away with from this book is that she really does a good job of capturing that time of year. Yeah.
In fact, I just opened issue number 4, the latest issue, to I just opened the issue to one, and here's a good example, I think, of the kind of comics that you'll find here, getting to, let's say, what you were just describing, and then what I was saying earlier about looking at the positive that you can really milk from life. And this is a strip called Signs of Early Fall, where she uses, as you mentioned, the 9-panel grid, which is primarily what she uses, to emphasize bits of her life where she's living that change, that let you know that it's time for the fall. And, things like rainstorms bringing in cooler weather, the babysitter can't come because of cheerleading practice, the sound of a rake on weekend afternoons. And then, of course, the last panel, everything suddenly tastes better. And she's drinking a cup of coffee and she says to herself, my God, this is the best coffee ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
things like that.
She often does find that the coffee she's drinking is the best coffee she has ever had, which is good.
Maybe she should get Just Coffee Co-op as a sponsor to her comics.
Yeah, well, maybe they'll sponsor somebody.
Yeah, we tried.
So there's her kind of being out in nature comics, or whether she's out with Gus on a snow day or she's out running, all those things make I think she really captures that experience really well. And I also like her when she does comics about comic shows and comic conventions. I mean, I think we've talked about this with some other autobiographical cartoonists as well, but the kind of network of comic creators, especially as they go to stuff like MoCCA and SPX, and but also her own responses to reading things that other people have done. Like, for example, she gets really inspired by reading the first volume of Carol Tyler's You'll Never Know. Mm-hmm. And so the experience of comic creators with either other comic creators or with reading other comics, I often find really interesting, and I think diary comics can lend themselves to that sort of thing as well.
Right, because, some of the creators who make an appearance in the various strips in Paper Pencil Life are, the aforementioned Glynnis Fawkes. We have Jennifer Hayden. We have Gabrielle Bell, and a variety of others. And some of these she does see at cons, but at times there are strips we see where she's meeting up with other creators outside of cons. So that's interesting as well, to see her relationships with other cartoonists, as you point out.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing I really liked about Paper Pencil Life is that every now and again she'll pull in memories of her parents. And this is interesting because I think it would be easy in a diary comic like this to get lost in the immediacy of your own family, right? Mm-hmm. So there's Summer, her husband Graham, and then their son Gus. And, Gus is definitely, from these comics, enough of a handful to where you could definitely limit yourself to just your relationship with Gus. That could be a strip all onto itself. Mm-hmm. But I like that she brings in her past at times, not too frequently, but every now and again, especially as it relates to her parents. And one of the things I'm interested in maybe seeing in future issues of Paper Pencil Life or the online comic, and we should mention that you can find this, her website is summerpierre.com, that's one word, but she also puts up these comics that she later collects in Paper Pencil Life on her blog, which is summerpierre.wordpress.com. But I'm interested in seeing more about her relationship with her parents in future strips, because that seems to be an uncertain or maybe an ambiguous relationship. We know a little bit about what her parents did and her feelings about them, but not a lot. And I find that mystery quite compelling. And going from the first issue into the most recent fourth issue, I learn a little more about her past and her relationship with her parents especially, but there's still quite a number of question marks that may never get answered, but I'm intrigued and I want to learn more. Right.
And, especially in terms of what kind of art her father did, mm-hmm. And how that may have influenced her. And also these times where her mother goes out on the road with bands. Also look interesting. And you mentioned that those flashes back to the past. One of my favorite ones is not so much related to her parents, but her memories of listening to Casey Kasem's Top 40.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah,
because that definitely mirrors my own experience, and it reminded me of that frustration of, what would probably be like impossible for a younger modern audience to even understand that, if you didn't listen to Casey Kasem's Top 40 live, you were going to miss it. And so, if you were into it, if you're into finding out what the number one song was going to be, and somehow you got interrupted, or your parents needed you to do something, or, you were out, you missed it, and you couldn't go look it up on the internet to see, what did I miss? What was number one? Or even listen to it again. So it was always really frustrating. I mean, I remember just, whining to my mom if she interrupted any of the top 40 while I was listening to it. And so that her describing that experience, and also the kind of how the stuff that if you were listening to the beginning of the show, you got the kind of dregs of that week's music at the bottom of the list.
Yeah. I can't remember if that was in issue number 2 or issue number 3 of Paper Pencil Live. It's 3. Yeah. But yeah, that, along with what you said, that was one of my favorites, just because of the similar memories. And we should mention that from what we can gather in these strips, Summer Pierre is about the same age as we are. Mm-hmm. I think I'm a little older, but we're experiencing the same things. And so we get information about her growing up, let's say the 1970s into the 1980s, which we can definitely relate to. And in this particular strip, and I can't remember the name of it.
Long distance dedication.
Long distance dedication, yes. Is she talks about how on Sundays in her household, her mother and she would do housework. So she would have to pick up her room. They'd have to do laundry, clean up, and things like that. But she would listen to American Top 40, Casey Kasem's American Top 40, as she was doing it. And as you pointed out, you listen early on and you get, number 40, number 39, things that may be interesting, but, they're lower on the chart. So more like the dregs, as you point out. But you had to stick around to get to the number one or the top 5, let's say. And one of the things that frustrated me I liked Casey Kasem, but one of the things that frustrated me is the closer you got to the top 10 and then into the top 10, the longer it took between songs, right? So there may be, you can go directly from 38, 37, 36, maybe a break, and then 35 and 34, then another break. But once you got into the top 10, Kasem would take a lot of breaks and long distance dedications and other things, little bits of information that he would throw in. And you're right, younger readers couldn't relate to this, but it reminds me of the contemporary phenomena of watching things on TV on demand, especially cartoons, or even things like the Cartoon Network, where no matter what time of the day it is, kids can watch cartoons. But when we were growing up, it was Saturday mornings and that's it. You wanted to listen to see what the top songs were in the country. You had to wait till Sunday, and if you missed it, you missed out. Now, later in life, I did get issues of Billboard magazine, so I knew what the top 40 would be before Sunday. Mm-hmm. But before I started getting issues of Billboard, I had to wait to Casey Kasem on Sundays.
Right. So I think you made a good point earlier on that these diary entries are not just about what are kind of the immediate experience of Summer Pierre's daily life, but also have this nostalgic element to them as well on occasion. And I appreciate that mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to say that I don't think I had read any of Summer Pierre's comics before Paper Pencil Life. Had you?
No, I wasn't familiar with her stuff before this.
I think where I came up with her as a possibility for this episode is once we decided to include both Glynnis Fawkes and then Catriona Chapman in this episode, we were wondering, okay, who else could we include? I actually emailed John Porcellino and asked him whom he might recommend. And Summer Pierre was someone that he said that has been quite excited about lately. So, John, thank you for the recommendation of Summer Pierre, which worked out really well because I think that not only are Summer Pierre and Glynnis Fawkes friends, but their comics are somewhat similar in what they do. So it's a good pairing. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and I think all three of these are creators are examples of creators doing really interesting things with self-publishing autobiographical comics.
Right. I think Catriona Chapman is kind of a standout among the three here, and we'll get to that in a moment. But you're right. I mean, all three, for the most part, are autobiographical. Now, we've mentioned where people can find Paper Pencil Life and get issues, and that is via her website, summerpierre.com. We should also mention that Pierre has short pieces coming out in 2 recent publications. And in fact, both of them have been recently kickstarted. One is she's in issue 7 she's got a story in issue 7 of the Kilgore Quarterly, which we've discussed on this show a couple of times, a really good quarterly. So check that out. But she also has a story in another book that I also kickstarted, or I participated in the Kickstarter, and this is Bottoms Up: True Tales of Hitting Bottom or Hitting Rock Bottom, and so it's a collection of stories about, as the subtitle says, hitting rock bottom, whether it be because of an addiction or something other thing going on in life. It seems to be a collection of really good stories, and she has something coming out in that as well.
Oh, good.
that brings us to the last creator, the self-published creator that we're looking at on this episode, and this is Katriana Chapman. And she is the mind behind KatZine. And so far, we have 7 issues of KatZine that has come out. She's been releasing these since March of 2015. And you can find more information about Katriana and her work at her website, which is KatrianaChapman.com. That's KatrionAChapman.com.
Right. And these are less like kind of the diary comics that we've seen in the previous 2, but for the most part, she does do shorter autobiographical pieces. Occasionally she does, there's a couple fictional pieces that appear in here, but for the most part, they're short autobiographical pieces. And she also has what we might describe as kind of semi-regular features in each or in most of the books, including local business, which is usually a 1-page strip about a business in her neighborhood that she frequents. What Sergio talks, something kind of I don't know, funny or odd that her boyfriend Sergio will say. And featured plant, where she'll draw a plant, a specific kind of plant, and write a little bit of text about it. And fear and love, which are short pieces that illustrate certain things she's, as the title suggests, things she's afraid of and things she loves.
Right. Now, I first found out about KatZine and actually Katriana Chapman, I guess it was a little more than a year ago. And this is when, and I think she was the one who reached out to us. She works with Avery Hill Publishing in the UK. So, whereas Summer Pierre and Glynnis Fawkes are from the United States, Katriana is from the UK. And so she had emailed us about the first book from Tilly Walden, and I actually ended up interviewing Tilly. It was in May or June of last year. It was right before HeroesCon last year, and that turned no, it was 2 years ago. That's when it was. It was 2 years ago, and so that's how I got to know Katriana. But I only knew her as a publicist working with Avery Hill, and then through the course of one of our correspondence, she also mentioned, I happen to be a cartoonist as well. Would you be interested in looking at the first couple of issues of my title, KatZine? And that was very kind of her. So I said, sure. So she sent me, I think the first 2 or 3 issues of KatZine, the newest ones at the time. And I really was impressed. And so when we decided to do a self-published show, it was the perfect opportunity to finally talk about KatZine on the show. Now, I don't know if you remember, Andy, but last year we actually did briefly have Katriana on the Comics Alternative when Gwen and I did a publisher spotlight a little more than a year ago on Avery Hill titles. And we did a brief conversation with Katriana and 2 of her coworkers at Avery Hill, just to set a context for the publisher spotlight. Mm-hmm. And so her voice has been on the show before, but now we're talking about her comics.
Right. And and her comics are really nice. I really, really like her drawing style, which seems to be mostly a kind of pencil.
Has a very soft feel.
To it. Yeah. But also somewhat on the more kind of realistic end of the spectrum. But also that she does narrative comics, but also will do kind of use comics for different purposes, like illustrated, well, I guess it might be informational pieces.
Right.
But also spends a lot of time recounting her travels as well, which I think links her up with what we talked about with Glynnis Fawkes. as well. And being in the UK, she has traveled what seems to be pretty extensively in the UK and in Europe.
Right. And not just Europe, but also in South America.
Right.
And we get a number of stories based out of that. So, and Canada. So she's much better traveled than I am. And so it's interesting to read about this. I think the thing, a moment ago I said that, all of these writers that we're dealing with today have something in common, but the one that is the outlier in a variety of different ways is Catriona Chapman and KatZine. And I think one of the ways that KatZine stands out is, as you've already mentioned, not all of her comics are autobiographical. Most of them are, but not all. But KatZine is different in that it's a one author anthology. Now, you've mentioned some of the features that we get in most of the issues: Sergio Talks, Featured Plants, Fears and Loves, and Local Businesses. And I love those, right? So when I pick up an issue of KatZine, chances are I can expect all of those features. Not all of them are in each issue, but most of them are in almost all the issues of KatZine so far. So I like that. But you also have a variety of different pieces. So sometimes you get these 1 or 2 page observations or information pieces. At other times you get stories that are longer that go on for 5 or more pages. And so I really do appreciate the variety that you get with KatZine. And I think an issue of KatZine is shorter than an issue of Paper Pencil Life. But I feel that you get more in KatZine just because of the variety, and you don't necessarily get more. It's just a feeling of more quantity, just because there's so many more different things going on in each issue of KatZine.
That makes sense. And and following those first four issues that we got, the remaining 3 issues tend to be more, rather than being kind of numbered issues, are more thematic. Right, so we have the Eagle issue, the Boat issue, and the Factory issue. And in fact, once we get to the Factory issue, which I think is the latest one, right, from March 2017, that book is almost entirely a single narrative. There's a 1 page of Sergio Talks, 1 page of Featured Plants, but then the rest of it is this story called Moving Parts, which recounts her experience working in Amsterdam at a factory that makes conveyor belts for other factories.
Right. Yeah. Which is really interesting. And you're right. I think this story, Moving Parts, I think is the longest of any pieces in any issue of KatZine. Another thing that stands out about these most recent issues, and you're right, that with the last 3 issues, we don't have them numbered, but they're, I guess, designated by theme. I wonder if that's a direction she's going, is that from here on in, instead of numbering her issues, she's going to give them a particular focus, right? But in the last 2 issues, the Boat issue and the recent Factory issue, she does something else. She tells us a little bit of information about a project that she has going on, and this is a new graphic novel. And so in these last 2 issues, she gives us some sneak peeks and some information about a much longer form narrative that she's working on that apparently is going to be, I guess, autobiographically based. But from what she tells us in the Boat issue, it's not going to be just strict autobiography. In fact, that she's going to throw in a bit of fantasy. In other words, she's going to take her own experiences and travels, and I think specifically in South America, or maybe is it in Mexico or South America? I can't remember. But she's going to bend it in a way that it won't be strictly, or at least 100% autobiographical. So, I mean, she really has whetted my appetite for what this new book is. I mean, one, I wonder, who's going to publish this, or if she's going to self-publish it. As she does with KatZine. And also, what kind of story is she going to tell? And how is she going to play around with the autobiographical form? Right.
I think all those things are interesting. And I also think it is an interesting use of the self-published zine format to include this kind of process stuff to keep the readers that you're building through access to your zine, keep them up to date about what is going on in your larger projects and get them kind of hooked or dedicated to seeing what that's ultimately going to look like. I think that's a really effective use of this sort of publishing format.
Right. And that's another way in which KatZine kind of stands out from the other things that we've been discussing today, and, Greek Diary and then Paper Pencil Life, in that this is, as the title would suggest, something much more zine-ish than graphic novel-ish, right? Because there also, there are those sections where she tells us, the process, the idea that she has in terms of this new graphic novel that she's working on. But there are other pieces as well, going back to the very first issue, that are primarily prose-based. So it's not just the comics.
Mm-hmm.
So I like it. Now, of the 7 issues that have come out, the one that really stands out as different from other issues of KatZine is issue number 4. And this is one where she calls it her special travel issue. And she gives us kind of a quick rundown of her and Sergio's travels in Iceland, Canada, New England, and New York. And I say a quick rundown because issue number 4 of KatZine is, I guess, as long as any other issue of KatZine, but it's only of their travels. And for them to have traveled through so many regions, I mean, there's a lot packed into this. And so I couldn't help but think of the challenge that she went through in terms of condensing her trip to fit into this one issue.
Right.
So that's impressive.
That is impressive. And, I was also reminded a little bit of what is a glacier that we just talked about recently as well. I think that there's this, this trend that we're seeing here. I mean, it's not new to autobiographical comics by any means, but the idea of using autobiographical comics as travelogue. We're definitely seeing. I feel like we're seeing more of it, at least, and I think these are good examples that we've gotten here so far.
Right. Yeah, and also, with what is a glacier, Iceland again.
Yeah.
So there's something about Iceland that is drawing cartoonists to it. Yeah. Another thing that's really interesting about KatZine issue number 4, the special travel issue, is that it's just her travels, right? And the table of contents, which is basically a context, right? And this issue of KatZine is a special issue telling of a story of a trip I took in August 2015, so on and so forth. And that's it. I mean, there are no other pieces, and I appreciate that. Because if you look at KatZine as a whole through its 7-issue run so far, this issue was like a momentary pause in what we had been getting with the single-authored anthology. Right.
And it also, I think, shows her progress as a comics creator to build up to doing something long like this, so that then when she does something similar with the factory issue, we are seeing over the course of these 7 issues the evolution of her as an artist. And I think her style remains fairly consistent throughout. So that's not so much evolving, but her storytelling chops are.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely a creator to watch out for. I mean, all of them that we've discussed on today's episode. And I think I'm saying that Catriona Chapman is someone definitely to watch out for, because I think that our listeners, of the 3 that we're discussing, if they've heard of any of them, would be less apt to hear about Catriona Chapman just because she's a UK creator. And I don't think she's had much, if any, exposure in the United States.
No, that's probably true. I mean, you could go, for example, to SPX or MoCCA and pick up Greek Diary or Paper Pencil Life, most likely, right? But I think the only way you could get KatZine is if you order it directly from her. But it is a nice. I mean, her art is fantastic. Her stories are really engaging, but also it's just a really nicely produced self-published comic.
Yeah. The whole product itself, holding it in your hand, the covers, the size of it, it's very attractive.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a great object. And, we do encourage you to get issues of KatZine and even subscribe to her newsletter. So go to Katriana Chapman's website, which is katrianachapman.com, and you can not only sign up for the newsletter and shop for, issues of KatZine and also some of the other work that she does, but you can also see some of these stories that we've been discussing. So, for instance, you can see the various Sergio Talks strips that are there, and also other things that you can find in various issues of KatZine complete stories, like Darkness Falls Again, which is in the boat issue, and her story Highlands and Islands, which appeared in 2 issues of KatZine. So I think, going to the website is a great way of introducing yourself to the work of Katriana Chapman.
Yep.
So there you have it. My and Andy's special look at self-published creators. We started off with Glynnis Fawkes' Greek Diary. After that, we looked at the first 4 issues of Paper Pencil Life by Summer Pierre. And then we wrapped up with KatZine, issues number 1 through 7 by Katriana Chapman.
Yeah, all really interesting self-published comics that we'd recommend checking out.
Yes, and another thank you to Glynnis, Summer, and Katriana for sending us copies of your work, and a special thank you to Glynnis Fawkes, who's sending us Greek Diary, got this whole ball rolling on this special episode of the Comics Alternative.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And, if you want to find great comics like this, maybe not these exact titles because they're self-published, but for other great comics, definitely go to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find great prices at incredible discounts every single month. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our special episode on self-published comics. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2 guys at comicsalternative.com. And you can also contact us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed, which you can check out at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us elsewhere in the social media world, such as on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and let us know how we're doing and find out what we're doing.
That's right. And we'll be back next week with more good stuff. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.